Okay, it looks here. Are we ready to resume, Mr. Leventhal? We're not, you're on mute.
Okay. Can I be heard now?
Are you ready to proceed?
Yes, we are.
Let's call our next witness, please.
We may be missing Mr. Fox.
Good point.
He should be here momentarily.
It looks like his camera's just turned off.
Yeah.
Mr. Fox, I apologize. I was ready to proceed in your absence, but
Well, I'm sorry, it appears you know, old trial lawyers never miss an opportunity to go to the men's room. Okay?
but to his credit, Mr. Respondent objected. He refused to proceed.
I owe them one.
That was Mr. Cammons. I was okay with it.
Mr. Leventhal, you call your next witness, please.
Okay. Could we let Mr. Carrick in, please?
Yes, letting him in now.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Could you just put it on? Oh,
Thank you.
Is he muted?
Well, now,
Mute, Mr.
Eric, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may proceed, Mr. Leventhal.
Please state your name for the record, Mr. Carrick.
Bernard Carrick.
Mr. Carrick, what is your employment now?
I'm retired from the New York City Police Department, and I have a private consulting group called the Carrick Group, LLC.
And what's your position in the Carrick Group?
CEO.
And what type of consulting do you do?
Various security, national security, legal assistance, criminal justice, consultancy, things like that.
And are you free to divulge what type of work that you've done in this area for your presently or in the recent past?
Yes, yeah.
Could you say it for the panel?
I have I've worked for about 5 years for His Majesty the King of Jordan as a national security advisor. I built Jordan's super maximum security prison that holds the Al-Qaeda operatives that come into the Kingdom of Jordan and from around the region. I also created their National Security Crisis Management Center. I've done security assessments for the Sheikh of Dubai in the Emirates. I've worked in Trinidad Tobago. I've worked in Guyana. I've worked on a number of criminal justice campaigns and been an advisor in a number of political campaigns, primarily focused on criminal justice, prison reform, criminal justice reform, things of that nature.
And could you give us some of your prior employments?
I was the interim minister of interior of Iraq under the Bush administration. overseeing all the national security elements for the government of Iraq following the fall of Saddam. Prior to that, I was the police commissioner of the New York City Police Department. I was the commissioner on and in the aftermath of September 11th. I ran Rikers Island in the New York City jail system for 6 years.
What capacity? In what capacity?
I was the chief of staff, elevated to the first deputy commissioner, elevated to commissioner. That was over a 6-year period. Prior to that, I mean, to shorten it up, I've been a cop, a correction officer, a detective, a warden. I was assigned to the New York Drug Enforcement Task Force with the DEA for close to 5 years, I think.
All right. And in doing such, did you receive any awards in the course of this employment?
Awards?
Yes, awards or recognition.
Yes.
Your service to the country and for public and heroic service. Could you mention those awards, please?
I earned the Medal of Valor from the NYPD for a gun battle in which I saved my partner who had been shot. I think 5 commendations, 10 meritorious police duty, 13 exceptional police duty. I received the Medal of a U.S. Presidential Commendation from President Reagan for heroism. Ellis Island Medal of Honor. I've been knighted, honored by the Queen of England for my service to the country in the aftermath of 9/11, and a number of things like that, you know, regarding heroic acts during my career.
Did there come a time where you were nominated for Secretary of Homeland Security?
Yes, sir.
And what year was that?
That was into December 2004.
And who was the president at that time?
President George Bush.
And at that time, did you withdraw your name from consideration?
I did.
And why was that?
I had a nanny, a domestic servant that my wife and I had paid cash to over about an 18-month to 2-year period between 2002 and 2004. That came to light. Well, actually, it didn't come to light. I brought it to light. And as a result, I withdrew my name from consideration.
And were you charged for this?
There was, as a result of my withdrawal, there was about a 2-year state investigation by the Bronx District Attorney's Office. It was a grand jury investigation that lasted about 2 years. In that grand jury investigation, they fined me. I received a fine for 2 ethics violations. At the conclusion of that, I was then investigated by the Justice Department. As a result of that investigation, that all started with this nanny thing, I was then indicted in 2007, I think, for some of the same conduct that I was charged with statewide from the state. And I eventually pled guilty to 8 criminal counts in 2009, I think.
And you surrendered, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were, how long were you in prison?
I was sentenced to 48 months. I served 3 years and 11 days.
And after your release, were you given, did President Trump give you anything?
Yes, 10 years to the day, I believe it was February 18, 2020. I was sentenced in the case on February 18, 2010. On February 18, 2020, I was granted presidential clemency.
Okay. Now, was that a pardon?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, after your release from prison, were you called upon by the government to help them in any way?
Yeah. I think I was released in my initial release was in May of 2013. Between May and December of 2013, I was contacted by the U.S. Government Accountability Office, and they requested me to come to Washington, D.C. to meet with them to speak to their nationwide directors on criminal justice and prison reform, and to give them my insights on fraud, waste, and abuse within the federal prison system. I went to Washington. I briefed them for about 6 hours on my findings, or at least what I thought I witnessed while in the system. I was also.
Did you ever testify before any Senate or House committees?
Yes, on several occasions, both during the Obama administration and the Trump administration. I was called upon to testify in various positions on criminal justice and prison reform for both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans.
And were some of the topics, were they sentencing reform, mass incarceration, et cetera, solitary confinement?
Yes, sir. All of those and more, but the primaries was pertaining to my views on mass incarceration, on solitary confinement, the use of solitary confinement, and things of that nature.
And did you found any organizations during this time?
Yeah, there was an association that me and some others put together that basically I wanted to address some of these issues. I forget the name of it. It was back in 14, I think.
Could I refresh your memory? May I refresh his memory, Mr. Chair?
I have no objection.
Was it law
Yes.
enforcement? Was it law enforcement leaders to reduce crime and incarceration?
Well, that was one. Yes, that was one, and that consisted of federal agents. That consisted of federal agents, correction officials, police officials, and U.S. prosecutors from around the country that was looking at criminal justice reform and making recommendations to the White House at the time, and the House committees on criminal justice and prison.
And in 2015, did you publish a book?
Yes, I did.
And was that your first book or your second book?
No, that was my second book.
And what was this called?
From Jailer to Jailed.
And did it have a subtitle?
You're
My
gonna have to refresh my.
Was it my journey from police and corrections commissioner to inmate?
Yes.
All right. Now, what is your involvement now at this point on the war on terror and the nation's military and state law enforcement on the war on terror?
Well, since the aftermath of September 11th, I've been an avid supporter of the war on terror. I think a lot of people don't realize this. I lived and or worked in the Middle East for close to 11 years, I think. And I've worked in positions there where I have a pretty good understanding of the radical Islamic views of America and why we were attacked prior to September 11th and what those threats are today. So I'm in contact with a number of agencies, a number of law enforcement agencies, to which I consult or advise or give them my insight. And I was also on the International Association of Police Terrorism Committee years ago with regard to the same thing.
Okay. And Mr. Carrick, how did you come into the Trump 2020 campaign? How did you become involved?
I was a supporter of President Trump, from the time he announced. I've known him since, I don't know, 1992 or 1994. I've known him a long time. I got to know him when I worked in the city. I knew him as correction commissioner, police commissioner, long before he ever announced he was running for president. When he did announce, I was supportive. I campaigned for him around the country, did a number of different speaking events for him around the country, and was a supporter in both campaigns.
Did there come a time when you worked for Mr. Giuliani in regard to the Trump 2020 campaign?
Yes.
And what was your role?
In the aftermath of the election, I think on the evening of November 4th, Mayor Giuliani called me, said that he was going to be heading up a legal team to look at the election on behalf of the president, and wanted me to come back to Washington, D.C. I was in D.C. on the night of the election. I went home the morning or early afternoon of the 4th. The mayor called me, I think, that evening. And then I took off and went back to D.C. the next morning to assist him in his investigation.
And did there come a time on that date when you went to Washington that you went to the campaign headquarters in Arlington? I think it was Arlington, right? Or you can correct me. Was it in Arlington, Virginia?
Yeah, I met the mayor first at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel early that morning. And then we left there and went to the campaign, the Trump campaign headquarters, which was in Arlington, where the mayor went and met with some of the campaign attorneys and other people involved in the campaign.
Could you describe the room?
Well, there were a number of rooms, but the primary room was it was a big conference room, and they probably had, I don't know, I want to say 30 seats around the conference table. That was the primary room where he had his meetings that morning. There were a number of offset cubicles and rooms that we later used, but that became sort of the base for the investigative team.
And do you recall who was in? Could you describe the situation in the room in terms of people, phone calls, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, we just got there. We were the campaign people that were there was basically collecting data on the election, and it was kind of chaotic when we arrived. They were looking at the election results in a number of different states. Primarily, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and a few others, but those were the primary states. There were a number of people that were there when I got there, physically got there, and campaign people, some of which I didn't know and still don't know. But it was pretty crazy.
Do you recall who, I know you weren't involved in the litigation strategy. What was your role, actually?
Basically, my role was a primary investigator and coordinator for the mayor. The mayor was overseeing the investigation or litigation prep, if you will, and my job was to assist him, coordinate for him, with him. And I can't think of another word other than like an intake agent for the mayor, because we had documents coming in. People were sending information in from various states. They were sending information in from the White House, perhaps. Information was coming into the campaign. There was a bunch going on. And this was really, as I've explained it in the past, this was sort of an understaffed legal team with an enormous task. So I was sort of the mayor's primary coordinator and investigator.
And you were not the only person funneling information to the mayor, but you were one of the people and one of the main people funneling. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, sir.
And could you get those exhibits up there now?
We'll start with 40.
Yeah. We're going to put up some exhibits that, exhibits 40, what was 39? Give me 1 second.
39 is the Pennsylvania statute opening of ballot
No,
box.
okay. Exhibit 40, 41, 42, and 40, and 43. Let's start with 40. Are you did there come a time that you had provided, well, I don't want to testify. You had given us these exhibits, 40, 41, 42, and 43. Could you show me each one? So, have you had a chance to look at the headings of all those three?
Yeah, I can't see the exhibits. I just see the opening page. Okay, now I see them. And I see.
This is 43. We'll show you
This is
40.
40. This is 40.
Oh, this is 40? Okay, this is 40.
Yeah, I think these are the documents that I gave you.
All right, show them 41.
42.
Could you show us 42, please?
No, 40.
43, please. Did there come a time when these exhibits came into your possession?
Yes.
And was that before or after? Do you know when you got them? I withdraw the first clause. Do you know when you received these exhibits?
No, I can't say the exact date. It was early on in the investigation or the inquiry we were conducting. Like I said, keep in
Say it
mind.
was either before or after November 15th or 16th?
No, I think it would have been before that.
Okay. I move these exhibits into evidence. Oh, not yet, not yet. Can you swear that all these information in these exhibits are true?
are true?
Yeah.
No. No, I cannot.
No, so the contents of them, you can't verify, but this is the information that was collected by the team. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, keep in mind, as I tried to explain earlier, and I know I'm doing a disservice to this explanation, but we had documents that were coming in from probably 50 to 100 different sources. We had investigators in different states. We had our own investigators. We had technical people. We had other lawyers. We had lawyers on site that were in these different states. This material was coming in from, I don't know, like a lot of different people. So when that material would come in, I would look at it. If it was something that was related to a part of the litigation that the mayor may have been working on or something that he needed, I would get it to him directly. You know, the mayor had, not a lot of people had access to the mayor's email address. So most of the stuff that was emailed to the mayor came to my email or came through me, or was handed to me. If I thought it was important for the mayor to see it, personally, I would give it to him. If I thought it was something he was working on, I would refer it to him, and then get him what we got. But I couldn't swear to the accuracy of the information. It came from other people, and we were in the process at the time of investigating and confirming details. So could I swear to the accuracy? No, I can't.
Okay, so you had mentioned, well, let me ask you, did you collect any raw data or the campaign?
Yeah, we did. We collected a bunch of raw data early on. I mean, within the first few days.
Hold on. Maybe I should give a foundation. Could you go to Exhibit 43, please? All right. Do you see that one, Mr. Carrick?
Yeah.
All right. Could you tell us how this came about?
Could you scroll up? I can't see. Oh, okay.
Make
All
it
right.
a little bigger too, please, so you can read it a little better.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, I got it. Yeah, this document, this isn't the only document. There was a bunch of documents like this that came from investigators that was collecting raw data from both Pennsylvania and Georgia. And that data was coming primarily off the Secretary of State's website. What the investigators were doing is they were locating, in this case, people that had voted in multi-states, Pennsylvania and Georgia. And that part of the investigation was sort of ongoing. There was other data collected in this from the same website that basically had a bunch of improprieties or improprieties, I would imagine, where you know, so many ballots went out, yet more ballots came in that went out when they came in versus when they came back. There were 20 different inconsistencies with regard to the material that we were collecting. And at some point, we made an inquiry to the Secretary of State's office for more access to that raw data.
If I may, excuse me if I can interrupt you. What Secretary of State's office?
Pennsylvania.
And you said there was investigation between Pennsylvania and Georgia? Did
Yeah,
you
we
go-
were collecting data from both.
Okay. And did there come a time when you had to stop that?
Yeah, well, there
Why?
did.
Why?
Because the Secretary of State, when we started making inquiries about the data that they had online and the data we were trying to get access to, they shut down their website, their public website. they took all that data offline. And some of it involved this, and a lot of it involved the raw data of voters, ballots, dates, times, things like that.
Did you also contact the Georgia's Secretary of State or just Pennsylvania?
No, I think Georgia too.
And could you tell us which site went down first?
Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was the first to go down.
No, which site went down first? That's what I asked you.
Pennsylvania.
Okay. I think that's it. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second, Mr. Chair. When you went into Pennsylvania, who were the attorneys in the office that you recall?
For us,
Yeah.
on the.
No, I mean, not Pennsylvania, into Arlington. You didn't go to Pennsylvania, did you?
I went to a press conference in Pennsylvania on the, I
Yeah,
think
but
on
you
the
weren't,
7th.
you weren't on the ground in Pennsylvania, is that correct?
And I was on the ground in Philly. Yes, on November 7th, I think.
And-
With the mayor.
Okay. But when you were in Arlington, who were the attorneys in Arlington who, if you recall, who were working on Pennsylvania?
Yeah, the mayor, Joe DiGenova, Victoria Tosin, Boris Epstein, Catherine Fries, Bob, I forget her, a female woman, Christina Bob. And there may have been one or two more. Those are the primary.
Was Boris Epstein there?
Yes, he was.
And okay, and just one thing. Were you involved in the First Step Act getting passed by President Obama?
Yes. No, the First Step Act was actually it was passed and signed by President Trump. But yes, I had been working on the First Step Act and things of that nature under the Obama administration. I had been to the White House, I think 2 or 3 times, and been working with the council for the Democratic judiciary for about 2 years prior to Trump getting elected. And then I continued those efforts with Jared Kushner's office until the First Step Act was signed.
Are you familiar with Jenna Ellis?
Yes. Oh, she was there. She was with us at the campaign headquarters.
Okay. What is the First Step Act? And I think that's my last question for you.
The First Step Act is a number of incentivized inmate programs for the federal prison system that would give federal prisoners incentivized programs where they could reduce their sentence if they committed to and completed certain programs that would help them get jobs and education on the outside.
Mr. Chair, at this time, I'd like to move into evidence those exhibits, please.
43.
Mr. Fox?
I object. There are a number of things. First of all, I didn't hear any explanation. I heard a little bit of an explanation that they got the Secretary of State's office. It wasn't clear to me who the actual human beings were that did that, what the database was that they got from the Secretary of State's office, and indeed, or when that was done. That's the first thing. The second, and that only pertains to the 4th exhibit, which is exhibit 43. With respect to the first 3 exhibits, I haven't heard any testimony.
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you.
With respect to the first 3 exhibits, I haven't heard any testimony as to who compiled this information, where it was compiled from. Mr. Carrick candidly admits that he hasn't vouched for the credibility of it. And I don't see what it relates to in this issue. It's a list of names and addresses. So yes, I object.
Mr. Leventhal?
Mr. Carrick, could you go back to those exhibits now, please? Mr. Carrick,
Yes,
this exhibit is entitled People Who Voted Over 112 Years Old. Is that correct?
yes.
All right, go to the first page, please. Make it big, a little bigger, please. What does the first column say?
Objection. Now we're having the witness testify and exhibit without yet. I mean, we're dealing with the issue of authenticity.
Sustained.
All right, Mr. Carrick, how do you get this record?
It came from one of the investigators in the legal team.
And you know how he compiled it?
Yeah, they went into the various databases that they could have access to and collected the information and then started comparing that information to other records, so security records, death records, things of that nature. And the one thing I can tell you, although I didn't prepare this document, but I know it was adamant, the mayor was adamant that they needed confirmation on, if we're saying somebody was dead, if they found that this person was dead in one category, was there a way to confirm it in another? And I remember sending people back to go do things like that, confirm this data, make sure the data is correct. We didn't make these names up. They came out of one of those databases.
And is this only absentee ballots or mail-in ballots?
This was requested mail-in ballots.
Okay, and why couldn't you do the same for same day or early voting in person?
Well,
Mr. Leventhal, I'd appreciate if you could address your questions to this particular exhibit, and then I will allow Mr. Fox an abbreviated voir dire on this exhibit before I make a decision on its admissibility.
Yeah. Anything further you want to say how this was compiled or received, Mr. Carrick?
no, not other than I've said. It came from one of the investigators.
Mr. Fox, do you wish to voir dire?
Yes, briefly. What was the name of the investigator?
I have no idea. There were a
What
number of them.
consult?
Are you frozen, Mr. Fox?
No, I said, what database did he consult?
The databases here was the Secretary of State's office, I believe, from Pennsylvania.
And so the Secretary of State's office had this list of mail-in voters,
That's what I believe, yes.
and it had their dates of birth.
I believe so.
And this was a database that was available to the public.
It may have been on their public database, or it may have been another way. There may have been another way these guys acquired it from them, but that's where they would have to get it.
Okay, and you testified a moment ago that Mr. Giuliani insisted that this be accurate, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
efforts were made to verify that these individuals were born on the dates that were shown on these lists?
Well, I think what they did is they took the list that they had And then they went to corresponding lists. I say this because I remember the Social Security and death certificates being mentioned at the time, how they would confirm some of this stuff. So I think that's what they were doing.
So you have a database where you can get people's social security numbers?
I don't know what they were doing at the time, but that was one of the conversations, or how they were doing it.
What's the name of the database where you get somebody's social security number?
I have no idea.
So do you know anything at all about this other than that's an investigator told you that he got this information from the Secretary's database that the Secretary of State had?
No, not pertaining to the document, no.
And you don't stand behind the veracity of the information, correct?
No, it was under investigation at the time.
I object to this admissibility of this
So
document.
sustained at this time.
Well, then this should be admitted for the state of mind of Mr. Giuliani having these records.
Well, you can tie that up when he testifies.
Okay, can we go to the next one, please? Can you make it a little bigger?
Yes.
Mr. Carrick, do you see this one?
Yes.
When did you receive this exhibit?
It would have been around the same time. And the thing I notice on here, the third line, defined by the Social Security Death Index, which is probably what Mr. Fox was just asking me, the database that he was talking about. That could be where it came from, that specific database title. You know, and this came from some of the same people.
Now I move them both into evidence. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Fox, Wardier?
I'm not sure what both means, but with respect to this exhibit, which I understand to be exhibit 41, did you notice, Mr. Carrick, that the names on this exhibit were fairly generic names?
Okay.
For
Did
example,
I notice? No, I didn't notice. No, but go ahead.
For example, the second name is William Miller.
Right,
The third name is James Williams, correct?
right,
The next name is John Nickel.
right,
And we got Charles Brown down a few more.
right.
It didn't surprise you when you saw this that there are probably more than one voter in Pennsylvania with those names, did it?
Well, it would surprise me if William Miller, you had two living at 80 Kenrick Avenue. It would surprise me if they both had the same voter ID.
And
That would surprise me.
did anyone check the social security numbers, which is the last column, it's blacked out, but there are social security numbers on the original exhibit, correct?
I believe there is, yes, or
Did
was,
anyone
yes,
check
before it was
that
blacked out.
social security number of Joseph Greco, who lived at 415 2nd Street, Denora, Pennsylvania. Anybody check that?
I'm sure they did.
You don't know that, you're sure they did.
Right.
And who was it to compile this document?
The various investigators that work for the team.
And again, what was the source of the database?
This would have been the Pennsylvania, one of the Secretary of State's databases, I believe.
I continue to object. I don't think this witness has sufficient knowledge. And again, you don't stand behind the veracity of this one either, right?
No, I can't.
Continue to object.
Sustained at this time.
All right, the next exhibit, please. You make that bigger, please? Can you make it a little bigger? I can't even read it. All right, hold on. Huh. Go ahead. Do you see that, Miss? No, go back. Mr. Carrick, do you see this exhibit?
Yes,
Do you see the data sources?
yeah. I also see the methodology, which is, I think, would answer some of Mr. Fox's questions.
Go ahead.
And you know, the methodology in this case, the list was obtained searching for 2 active voters on findagrave.com as well as tributes.com. That's some of the outside sources that they were looking at when they were going through this stuff.
Okay. And, well, you see the title of this. This is only mail-in ballots and absentee ballots, right? It's not same-day voting or early voting. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And is that true of all these exhibits?
I believe so, yes.
Well, I move this exhibit in as well as 40 and 41 on the basis that these data sources are now evidenced.
Mr. Fox?
And who was it?
Here, you may
Yes.
voir dire if you wish.
Who was it that compiled this list?
Investigators for the team.
All right, now you say it came from findagrave.com. You know what findagrave.com is?
It's a site to find people that have passed.
It's not a government website, correct?
I don't believe so.
It's sort of Wikipedia for dead people, right?
Can't say that. I don't know.
People go out into the cemeteries and they take photographs of graves and they list them on this website.
Is Mr.
I
Fox
don't know that to be the
testifying?
case.
Is Mr. Fox testifying?
Is that what it is, sir?
I don't know that. to be
Objection,
the case.
objection.
Overruled. He's questioning the witness as to the propriety of admitting the exhibit into evidence.
What about tributes.com? Do you know what that is?
Same type of website, I believe.
Not a government website, right?
Don't think so.
It's a website of someone. Is it a website of someone who goes to various newspapers and looks for obituaries and tributes that are published?
No idea. I said I don't know. I don't know their methodology. No.
Now, what's being recorded here are people who died before their mail-in ballots were received, correct?
I believe so.
And does it show how many people died before their mail-in ballots were mailed?
Mr. Fox, I think you're getting into the content of the documents.
All right, then I'll okay. I continue my objection.
Sustained at this time.
All right, let's go to the last exhibit, please. There's one of the slated cases. Mr. Fox, could you, I'm sorry, not Mr. Fox, I don't want to cross-examine him even though he would testify. Mr. Carrick,
Yes.
could you tell me about this exhibit?
This is the general election absentee multi-state voters, and basically what they did, it's a list of 214,410 possible cases of the same person casting votes in Pennsylvania as well as Georgia. Every name on the list has requested, filled out, and returned an absentee ballot in the 2020 election.
And when the litigation, did you receive this also around the same time?
Yes,
And when the litigation was terminated, or before the litigation was terminated, you have similar names here, but you haven't been able to check absolutely whether the person in Pennsylvania and Georgia were exactly the same in all instances. Is that correct?
that's correct.
But there were on this list 214,410 possible cases, and it says possible cases, correct?
Yes. Keep it, can I talk? Can I say
Sure.
something?
Sure.
Keep in mind, nothing here, nothing was conclusive when in these documents. These documents were coming into us as an investigative tool for either litigation or litigation prep in looking at the problems within the election. So this was all a continual investigation. The documents you see, whether it's this one or the others, any of the ones that I provided at least, all those documents were collected and were part of an ongoing investigation. So there's stuff in here that may be conclusive or may not be, but it was all a part of that litigation prep.
All right. Mr. Fox has stated, implied that someone who might have mailed in their ballot and died after they mailed it in. You heard that, is that correct?
Objection.
Yes.
This is not even what this exhibit purports to be about.
Please rephrase your question, please.
Are you aware of any statute that invalidates a vote of someone who mails in a ballot and dies before election day?
Objection.
To my understanding, the vote does
Oh.
not count.
I'll allow it.
Thank you.
Okay, are we voir diring on this exhibit or what are we
I'm
doing?
moving that into evidence as well as the others. If you want to have the same ruling, we could save some time if Mr. Fox is going to ask the same questions and we're going to have the same result.
I'd like to make a record though.
Make a record if you would, Mr. Fox.
All right. Who was it that came up with the idea of comparing Pennsylvania and Georgia?
I got to be honest, I do not recall.
And why Georgia? Is there lots of Pennsylvanians moved to Georgia or vice versa?
Well, we found Pennsylvania, Georgia wasn't the only problem. We found a number of people coming into Arizona that came from California.
But I want to
number
focus on Georgia.
Let him answer the question, please, Mr. Chair.
So, this was an ongoing investigation. We were looking at improprieties and voter fraud, and that's part of the investigation.
You were trying to find improprieties in voter fraud, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And
Mr. Fox, Mr. Fox, could you address your questions to more narrowly to the exhibit, if you would, at this point?
did you notice the generic names of the people on this exhibit as well?
No, I got to tell you, Mr. Fox, this is pretty insulting. What do you think? We made this stuff up? No, I didn't notice because this was information that we were gathering from these databases. I didn't create those names, nor did the investigators, I can assure you.
Well, Mr. Carrick, does it come as a great surprise to you that there might be a Robert Lewis Miller that lives in Georgia and a Robert Lewis Miller that lives in Pennsylvania?
Well, that would not surprise me, but it would also surprise me if they had the same dates of birth, or they had the same prior address, or they had some other corresponding information that the investigators may have linked to putting their names on here. I'm sure they just didn't find a bunch of people in one state and say, oh, I got guys in another state, we're gonna put them all together.
Well, do you see dates of birth on this exhibit?
No,
Do you see, so do you see social security numbers on this exhibit?
no, I don't.
Anything to show, for example, that Eric James Moore who in Springfield, Pennsylvania is different or the same as the Eric James Moore in Dawsontown, Georgia, or Dawsonville, Georgia?
The specific information, no.
What this is a list of voters in Georgia and Pennsylvania who have the same names, correct?
Yes,
Okay, I continue my objection.
May I cross on the
The
voir dire?
his objection is sustained at this point.
Well, I don't know if Mr. Carrick is going to question if Mr. Fox is going to question Mr. Carrick, but I have one more question for Mr. Carrick. Mr. Carrick, at this point, you were going to investigate, if given an opportunity, if these people were the same people. Is that correct?
yes.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Fox,
No questions.
I'm sorry.
No questions. No additional questions.
Thank you. Does anybody on the panel have questions?
Excuse me? Oh.
Okay, no, panel has no questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Carrick. You're excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Call your next witness, please.
Before we do, Your Honor, can I just ask Mr. Fox one question? Are you going to call a rebuttal witness? I just want to know that. No, that's what I thought. Okay. Thank you. I just want to get a time frame, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Chair, we call Mr. Giuliani.
Mr. Giuliani, I remind you, you're still under oath.
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Giuliani, I'd like to go briefly into your past public service and concentrate first on your service to this country as Associate Attorney General of the United States. Can you tell us what years you were in that position?
I was Associate Attorney General from 1981 to 1983.
And during that time, could you tell us what your major duties were?
I was the third ranking official in the Department of Justice, appointed by President Ronald Reagan and confirmed by the Senate. My duties were to oversee what you would generally describe, excuse me, what you would generally describe as the criminal division side of the Justice Department. Would be the criminal division, the 92 United States Attorney's offices, the 92 United States Marshal's offices, the Bureau of Prisons, at that time, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the Pardon Attorney's Office, the criminal division of the Civil Rights Division, the criminal division of the Tax Division, criminal division of the Antitrust Division. Interpol. I was responsible for guiding the nominations, but that was inherent of U.S. attorneys and U.S. Marshals who were all individually confirmed by the United States Senate in the first year of an administration. There are about 180 of them that have to be confirmed. I was also in charge of a special commission that was put together by President Reagan and Attorney General William Frank Smith, the Attorney General's Task Force on Violent Crime, that wrote a very long report on violent crime, chaired by Professors Blakey and then Governor Thompson, and held hearings all over the country and formed the basis of criminal justice reform. Right through the 1994 criminal justice reform bill that President Clinton got through Congress, and continue to work on that into the Clinton administration. There were some other.
No, that's fine.
There were some others, but those were the main ones.
Okay, and did there come a time when you were the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York?
Yes, I left being Associate Attorney General, once again appointed by President Reagan and confirmed by the Senate to be United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York.
And can you give us some highlights of your tenure there?
Well, I had been an assistant U.S. attorney there for the early part of my career, and it was kind of an unusual choice because I asked for a reduction in rank. The Associate Attorney General is technically the boss of the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, but it was the office I grew up in, and it was the one that it's the office that I always wanted to serve in because I just have a tremendous regard for it. You want me to give you
Well, the highlights, just briefly, the highlights.
prosecuted thousands of cases. I think the ones that people would remember the most were the Commission of the Mafia. Those are the five heads of the five families that had operated in New York since 1931 as the head of the Mafia, which unusually has five families in New York, although most other cities are blessed to only have one, or not blessed, but luckily only have one. We had five. I prosecuted each one of the individual families themselves. Each probably prosecuted 300 or 400 members of the Italian-American Mafia. I also participated in the prosecution of 800 members of this Sicilian Mafia, for which I received several awards from the Italian government. I prosecuted two former Nazis, handled their extradition cases, one of them at the request specifically of President Reagan, because it was a very controversial case where there was a great deal of opposition to extraditing him by Pat Buchanan and people there's a great division of opinion within the Reagan administration about that extradition. The name of the former Nazi, or Nazi, I guess, is Maikovsky's. The other one was Linus. One of them was responsible for 22,000 deaths when he was commandant of a concentration camp. The other for 12,000. I argued and handled those cases personally. U.S. attorneys usually don't handle cases personally. I believe I was the last U.S. attorney in the Southern District to actually try a case while I was U.S. attorney. And that was a rather famous case that probably had a lot to do with my being mayor, which was the racketeering case against members of the then Mayor Concha's administration for taking multi-millions of dollars in bribes for city contracts. I prosecuted 60 highway commissioners, the state of New York, about an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. I prosecuted several and convicted Congressman Biaggi. Earlier in my career, I prosecuted Congressman Podell, convicted him. I brought the racketeering case against the Teamsters Union that imposed a receivership on the Teamsters Union that removed it from organized crime, effectively removing them from Las Vegas at the same time. That was accompanied by letters from 132 members of Congress to have me removed as the United States Attorney, which I was very happy President Reagan ignored and Vice President Bush condemned. I prosecuted in those days a very well-known financial I prosecuted a lot of people on Wall Street, the most prominent ones being Ivan Boesky and Michael Milken. They're probably best known as the prototypes for the movie Wall Street. I prosecuted a significant number of members of the Colombian cartels, drug cartels, as well as the FARC, which is the terrorist group in Colombia. I prosecuted several, in those days, Islamic hijackers, terrorists that formed, later became what we came to know as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I received the Attorney General's award several times for the most successful prosecutor or whatever. I was the subject of several mafia contracts to kill me. As a subject of a vote by the commission to kill me, which I won 3-2. Meaning 3 people voted against killing me and 2 voted in favor of it. That was a matter of record that didn't come out until 20 years later. I was also subject of several fatwas. A threat by the FARC to slit my throat if I went to, if I prosecuted them. My family also was threatened while I was U.S. attorney. I needed to have marshal's protection. I declined it. Actually declined it until I had a child. I argued at President Reagan's request the case that was brought to try to enjoin him from deploying cruise missiles. It was brought by a large number of members of Congress. And at his personal request, I argued that case myself in the Second Circuit. Right?
Okay,
And then I'm sorry. That's about.
Okay.
There were others, but
thank you. Mr. Giuliani, did there come a time when you were elected mayor of the city of New York?
I left being U.S. attorney in early 1989, right after President Bush was became president. Not because of that, but largely because of what I went ahead and did, which was I ran for mayor that year in 1989, and I lost in a very close election that had allegations of voter fraud in it. I did not pursue. I ran again 4 years later, and I won. And then I served as mayor of New York for 8 years.
And
In between, I practiced law. I represented AT&T. I represented two large antitrust cases. I handled both civil and criminal litigation. I had about 5 trials in that period of time. Most of the rest was, civil litigation.
And can you give us briefly some highlights of your tenure as mayor during those 8 years?
I was only the 3rd Republican elected in 100 years. I reduced crime reduced overall crime by 65%. I believe I reduced homicide by 70%, which was thought to be impossible to do. Nobody else has ever done that before or after. When I became mayor, there was a 10.5% unemployment rate. It went down to 5%. I'd like to think in part because of the economic reforms that I made. I cut the budget of New York City. I produced the first surplus in 35 years for 4 years in a row. Thank goodness when 9/11 happened, we were a city with a surplus rather than a city with a large hole in the budget. Wrong word. A large deficit in the budget. I established the first separate child welfare unit because up until the time I was mayor, the child welfare duties were done by the welfare department. They got very, very little attention. One of the things I was motivated to do because of the death of a young girl very early on when I was mayor was to reform that. I received several awards for that because that was copied in other jurisdictions. I established the first mayor's office and then set up the position of commissioner of emergency management. Did that largely because the year that I ran for mayor, but before I was mayor, there was an Islamic terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. I had a great deal of knowledge of that because it was only 3 years after I myself ran the joint, I also, as U.S. Attorney, ran the Joint Terrorism Task Force for the years that I was U.S. Attorney, which is a combination of the FBI and the New York City Police Department. I believe it was the first in the country. I didn't establish that. It was established by one of my predecessors as U.S. Attorney, but I enhanced it greatly when I was U.S. Attorney. And then when I was mayor, I put a lot more police officers in it and established a similar office in New York City. Thank goodness, 70 years before 9/11. So that when September 11 happened, we had a large number of well-trained anti-terrorism officers, which pretty much no other city had. Chicago and the state of Florida specifically copied our offices. Both Mayor Daley of Chicago and Governor Bush of Florida asked if they could have members of their administration participate in the task force that Governor Pataki and I put together. And then I helped them develop their task forces. I reduced the number of people on welfare from 1.1 million to 500,000, of which 90% were working. I started a welfare to work program. I started a workfare program, which required people on welfare to work, which was largely responsible for the turnover. So by the time we got to 2000, our welfare rolls were per capita one of the lowest in the country, and our employment was one of the highest. New York had traditionally always been behind the US employment rate. In other words, we always had an unemployment rate greater than the United States. While I was mayor for the last 5 years, our unemployment rate was much better than the United States. It's back to where it used to be. I reformed the system of selecting principals in the New York City school system. They have previously been given tenure and were allowed to stay there forever, no matter how good or bad they were. I was able to negotiate with the principals union, considered to be the first change, first time any teachers union agreed to accountability. I was unable to do that with the overall teachers union, as my predecessors all attempted the same thing. I've been unable to do that. But I do think in changing the principals, it had something to do with the improvement of the schools, so that the principals who were doing a bad job could be removed. The ones that were doing a good job could get a higher salary, which is impossible with teachers. Mr. Carrick mentioned that he was commissioner of the corrections department. I should say that when he began there, Rikers Island was featured on 60 Minutes as the worst, most violent jail in America. Rikers Island is a bit unusual. New York City puts all of its prisoners in one place because it has a big isolated island called Rikers Island. You fly over it when you come into LaGuardia Airport. It traditionally has been one of the most violent in the country. Mr. Carrick and his associates there moved it from the most violent in the country to the least. They reduced violence by 90%. That was documented by 60 Minutes in a piece they did in the year 1999, when they went in there to show how violent it was and found out it was a model prison. It was then used as a model for the next 8 to 10 years. My successor, Michael Bloomberg, improved it even more, as he did the reduction in crime, by the way. But that has since changed. And there are a lot of other things that I did. I worked 24/7 as mayor. I love New York City as I love America, and I devoted most of my life to making it better than it was. I sort of subscribed to the Athenian oath that was taken by my most famous predecessor, Fiorello LaGuardia, which is that my obligation was to leave my city better than it was given to me. I think I did that.
Thank you. And briefly, I know over the years, you've gotten many awards, but were there any significant awards that you can think of that you've received from heads of state or the president?
Sure, I was knighted by honorary knighthood. And I should correct Mr. Carrick because if he's a knight, he would have to lose his citizenship. You're not allowed to accept a knighthood as an American citizen because it's an honorific title barred by the Constitution. And I'm an honorary knight of the Queen, of the King now. He was also awarded that, as was my fire commissioner, Tom Von Essen, both of whom were impossible to describe heroes. During 9/11, Mr. Carrick and I almost died. We were locked together in a room that was hit by the first tower that came down. Governor Pataki thought we were missing, had actually drawn up an order for someone to take over the city. And then when I called him, he was very happy that I was alive. Mr. Carrick and I helped to get all these people through that. So I know Bernie Carrick, soul. When you go through something like that with a man, it creates a special kind of relationship. And he was a remarkable corrections commission. 90% reduction in violence. I used to go to Rikers Island regularly. Since my background was law enforcement, of course, I paid more attention to that probably than anything else as mayor. Although I did spend a great deal of time learning and memorizing the budget of New York City so that I could reduce.
Any other major awards from the president or any?
Yeah, I received one of the highest awards of the government of France by Jacques Chirac, who officially named me Rudy the Rock. Oprah Winfrey named me America's mayor on her show. I received the G-Man of the Year award from the FBI for my lifetime achievements for successful prosecutions with the FBI. That was about 6 or 8 years ago. I received many other awards. A lot of them having to do with September 11, which really I received because of the heroism, mainly of the people that worked for me. I was very honored to guide them, but they're the ones that were the real heroes.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Giuliani, you represented the plaintiffs in the litigation we've been discussing, Donald Trump for president versus Bookvar, correct?
I did.
How did you first become involved in your representation of the plaintiffs?
Well, starting in March of, hope I get the year right. I often confuse it. I think it was 2019. I began representing President Trump as his personal lawyer in, I guess, what you would call the Russian collusion investigation. That was the original impeachment investigation, which remained that way for quite some time. Now it's been very discredited, Russian collusion, but at the time it was considered to be gospel and almost treasonous if you deny it.
All right, well, we're going to stick to the
Okay.
litigation there.
All right. So I began representing him then, along with a team of 4 lawyers, and I was technically named the head of that team, but I always considered that Jay Sekulow and I together ran that team. He had as much, if not more, to do with it than I did. And he was the historical, he had been with, I replaced John Dowd, who left. He had been there from the very beginning, Jay had. And I represented him through the first impeachment. And at the time of the election, I was still his lawyer, the legal advisor. So although I participated very, very heavily in the first election, the 2016 election, in fact, I was basically lived with him for 5 months. In the 2020 election, my participation was much less because I was representing him. And there was the new impeachment inquiry involving Ukraine that came about.
All right, so starting with the election now on November 3rd, how did you become involved in this litigation?
Well, I mean, basically, it's been described. I was, I believe it was the morning after the election. Some people think it was the next day. But I believe it was the morning after the election. I went over to see the president in the Oval Office. I don't exactly remember what, maybe to just talk to him, or may have been on a legal matter, because I was still representing him as an attorney on the representing on the impeachment. Or it may have been just to commiserate with him because of what happened the night before. And during that conversation, which was about other subjects as well, which I think would be privileged, but unrelated to this. He asked me, but basically he asked me if I would take over the campaign. Would I go over there and find out what the heck was going on and direct it? And after we discussed it back and forth, we agreed that what I would do is oversee the litigation.
So did you, at some point,
Put together, first of all, find out what he had, what resources he had, because he had been told that they had draft complaints and they had teams in all these different states. Because if you might remember, about a month and a half before the election, there was a big article, I think it was in the Washington Post or the New York Times, saying that the Democrats had 1,000 lawyers that they had hired to litigate after the election, and Hillary Clinton had said that Joe Biden should never concede, no matter what. So as a result of that, President Trump told his campaign to do something similar. I was not involved in that. I was involved in it tangentially. I was around as his lawyer and I heard that. But then on that day, he said to me, go over and find out if they did that.
all right, so we're talking about the 4th. At some point on the 4th, did you go to campaign headquarters?
I did, but I
And
must,
that was in Arlington, Virginia.
yeah, I must have called some people because I brought some people with me. So I must have called Joe DeGenever and his wife and Dr. O'Brien and several other people that I knew I would need to help me. Because I didn't know exactly what I'd be doing. I might be going back to him and saying everything's fine.
All right, can you describe when you at the campaign headquarters, the arrangements that were set up for you in which you were working?
There were none.
So how did you develop those?
I knew all the people who ran his campaign from prior. I mean, one of them had been my press secretary on my presidential campaign. One of them had worked on my presidential campaign. The others, they were not people unknown to me. So I went and got them out of their offices. And I brought them in, and it took a little while to get them there. And after some conversation, I asked them to please give me all this stuff that the president thought had been put together, and I basically got nothing. It took a little while. A couple of files were produced. They did give me a lot of names of different lawyers in different jurisdictions who had litigated pre-election day issues. Some in Pennsylvania, but in other states too. And it was unclear as to whether they were lined up to do post-election litigation, or they were just lawyers who had handled the case back in June or back in whatever. These were challenges to, for example, the ones in Pennsylvania, because challenges to the changes that were made. It was done in several different states, maybe 5, 6. In many of them, they were litigated as a violation of the Constitution because it was executives making what were state legislative decisions, that kind of.
Right.
But there were also other contests, maybe more picayune, but the kind of stuff that goes on, in elections.
All right, so at some point while you were there, did you receive a call from Corey Lewandowski?
Listening to Corey's testimony, it sounds like he thinks he did it the next day. I think he did it that day. But
All right,
okay.
well,
I did receive a call, but it may have been from Pam Bondi.
okay,
They were together.
okay.
Pam Bondi was, as Corey Lewandowski said, the former Attorney General of Florida. She was a very active participant in the Trump campaign.
And what did she ask you to do?
She asked me to come to Pennsylvania, and she described the following set of facts to me. She said that when the Republicans arrived, a large number of them, to be inspectors at this gigantic convention center, they weren't allowed in. And then when they were allowed in, ballot counting had already started. And they were literally, this is the way she described it, they were put behind barriers like cows. And they weren't allowed to see, and they had up to this point, they've seen nothing. I said, you mean they have? I had way back in my career, I had been an inspector, election inspector for the Democrat Party. And I was like 22. And I had been involved in several of these. And I had remembered watching Bush v. Gore and the Chads. I said, you mean they're not looking at they're not looking at the ballots? How many have been counted so far? She said, I don't know, a couple 100,000, I think. I said, can't be. They couldn't have counted a couple 100,000. She said, well, that's what the number was given them. And she said, we haven't gotten to see anything. And
So she asked for your help, correct?
yeah, but I can't remember the stage now it was at, because she asked, and I declined. I said, gee, Pam, I don't have the time. Let me send someone. Because I got like 5 other or 6 other, I don't remember the number at that point. They kept growing jurisdictions that I have to deal with. Let me send Boris, or let me send Jenna Ellis was really my number 2. I was the head of the team, and I immediately appointed her as my deputy, so the president would have someone he could communicate with if it wasn't me. Once I realized that this was going to be long-standing.
Was a decision made at some point that you were to go?
Yeah, the decision was made. I may have even talked to don't know if I talked to the president about it, or maybe Mark Meadows, his chief of staff. I really didn't want to go because I had so many things to organize, and it seemed to me that just one jurisdiction wasn't worth sacrificing getting started in the others. And I was looking at something I never expected. I was looking at nothing. We had no preparation or anything. And I even asked one of them, can you start writing a complaint? And they told me they never wrote a complaint. And that's when I said, I'll write one. I'll write. I used to do it as a young associate. I think I can remember how to do it. Well, damn it, or something like that.
So this, after the decision was made for you to go to Pennsylvania, did you go down that day?
I did. I went. I finally decided. I mean, they called me back several times, and they told me they were being, pushed around, and I don't remember if they had. At some point along the way, they got the decision from Judge Cannon.
Well, that's before that decision.
But I don't think they had it yet.
All right, so you went down to Philly.
I drove down. It takes a couple hours.
And you got down there.
I brought several of my people with me. I can't remember exactly who, but I brought 2 of them. I think I may have brought Jen. I know I brought Boris. I think I left Jenna to run the office very early on. I mean, I think that's when I selected her as number 2. I said, okay, you're number 2 now. I saw Dr. Ryan with me.
Right.
I may have taken Giuliani or
So
I took a third person. I'm not sure. It's about 3 or 4 of us in the car. We drove from Washington to Philadelphia and got directions to the convention center.
So sometime in the afternoon of the 4th, you went to Philadelphia. Did you go to the campaign headquarters at that time?
No, I went. I think this is the order. Could be wrong. I could be the other way around. I think I originally went right to. They seem to be under a lot of stress.
Who is they?
Corey and Pam, and also this gentleman Mike Roman that Corey mentioned. I mean, legitimate. They seem like they were really getting. And I think at that point they described this extraordinary conversation with the sheriff, that the sheriff wouldn't execute a court order. So I said, I better go directly there.
Go where?
To the convention center.
So at some point you went to the convention
At some
center
point we
that afternoon?
Yeah, we were originally going to go to the campaign headquarters, Philadelphia campaign headquarters. Instead, we went to the convention center. Oh my goodness, I remember. I finally decided to go when Eric Trump called me. Eric Trump called me from Philadelphia, and he said, "You're really needed here."
So when you went to the convention center, what did you see or hear?
It was first, I spoke to Corey and Pam were both there.
Mhm.
They reiterated pretty much what they I told you and what they had told me on the phone, that they had gone. Pretty much what Corey testified to. I think I don't know if Corey and Pam did all the same things together or exactly who did what, but to me, it was a joint enterprise. And Pam, I'd probably talk to Pam more because she was a lawyer, but only because I was starting to try to figure out, well, what kind of legal remedy do we have to this? We've gotten this order from Judge Cannon and we're still not allowed in. I talked to the Philadelphia police.
So the order from Judge Cannon was issued on the 5th? As far as you know, or do you know what date it was issued?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what date it was published. I believe she gave the order orally and then she filed an opinion thereafter. Was it the same day or the next day? I can't tell you that. I didn't read an opinion. I was told her opinion. I read it much later. The only thing nor did I see Corey's piece of paper. He just told me about it.
Right.
Now, did they come in? So when I heard that, I went to the police, the highest police officer there, because I know the Philadelphia Police Department. I represented the former FBI Association as a private lawyer. I also represented a lot of police departments. And I knew the Philadelphia Police Department. So I said, what's going on with the sheriff? Well, I can't repeat his language, but he basically said that I don't know, the sheriff is off the reservation. That yes, they should be allowed in. And in fact, as campaign officials, they should be allowed in. Both of them were registered campaign officials, but he's not letting them in. Then I had a number, once people realized who I was surrounded by Republican campaign volunteers, the ones who, and they started explaining to me a lot of the things you see in the affidavits. You know, we weren't allowed to see any ballots. Thank goodness we have Mercer. Mercer has organized it. So I asked to see Mr. Mercer. And I met with Mr. Mercer. Jeremy Mercer explained to me that he came there that day in the morning ready to do what he normally did for years, which is to sit down. You know, he realized they would be spaced somewhat, but be equally spaced away from the official counter so that they could see the ballots, which he said he had done many, many times in the past. And instead he was told he wasn't being, first he wasn't allowed in. Then when he was allowed in, he was put behind a pen. Then he never got within 30 yards, he said, he couldn't see anything. And he kept complaining about it, didn't do any good. Then he organized his team so they could do something useful to just try to keep count of how many ballots were getting that they could see. Couldn't see the details on it, but they could see the ballots going into the machine. Could just try to keep count of that. So we could see how many invalid ballots there were.
Did there come a time when a decision was made that you made to assemble a legal team?
Yeah, well, I went to the campaign headquarters. It's very similar description of what happened there and how terrible it was. Jeremy gave me a list. I asked him, could you please, this is all very chaotic. And I did have people there taking notes. People came with me. And then some of the people volunteered to do it. I said, but it would be very helpful, Jeremy, if you gave me a list of who could testify to this. So we can get statements of some kind. I don't exactly know what our recourse is, but we should have this as this chaotic. We should have it recorded as best as possible. So the best thing I can do, I'll give you the list of my team that I put together. I have that, and I'll check off the people who showed up and the people who were registering things for me. He did that. He handed it to me. He handed one to Dr. Ryan. He handed one to my other assistant. And then other people told me their versions of how they had been pushed out or
Correct.
not allowed to do what they were supposed to do.
But I was referring to the team of lawyers that you were going to help you down there.
Well, I was doing that. I was doing that when I got taken away to
Right.
Philadelphia. I did it somewhat in the car, on the phone.
And who was on this? Who was
Well,
on
the team pretty much was assembled as follows. It was myself, Jenna Ellis, who was number two, Boris Epstein, who was on it, Joe DeGenova and Vicky Tenzing. They are husband and wife. Joe DeGenova, Vicky Tenzing. Tenzing is spelled Toensing.
And were there local lawyers?
They were the main group. Christina, who testified earlier, joined us about a week and a half later.
And were there local lawyers there when you got there who had already been working on the case? Or had been working on the team?
There was no team.
Right, so were there local lawyers that were put on the team?
Oh, I was then given the names of many lawyers. I was in the process of talking to them when I left to go to Philadelphia, some of which seemed to be really on top of what was going on, like our lawyer in Michigan, Thor, and some of whom didn't even know they were all lawyers. It was completely, there was a spectrum of issues where we had names down who had never been contacted, names down who quit, names down that quit then, and names down that sounded to me like they didn't know what the hell they were doing, or what they were doing, excuse me. And then names that were really highly competent. It depended on the jurisdiction. And you had to make those decisions quickly. I distinctly remember the lawyer in Michigan and the lawyer in Wisconsin said, thank God we've got some real lawyers.
So was a Mr. Hicks there?
No, Mr. Hicks was not in Washington.
No, down in Philadelphia.
Did he meet me at the,
Was he local counsel down in Philadelphia?
he was, but I'm not sure I knew that at the point that you're asking me about.
Right.
The first one that I met was Laura Kearns, who was there.
Was it Laura or Linda?
Linda, I'm sorry, Linda Kearns. I don't know if she was at the convention center or I met her at the campaign headquarters, but she had been doing the immediate litigation involving access. And that's all we talked about. We really didn't talk about any bigger case. She did, she may have been the one that first told me that Hicks was involved in the overall case and was
Right. And was Mr. Hicks working, when did Mr. Hicks begin to work on the case, if you recall?
Seems to me he was working on it before.
Mhm.
I mean, when I first talked to him, he knew an awful lot about it. I mean, he's I can't tell you when he had represented us, meaning the campaign, in prior cases in Pennsylvania. And when I spoke to him, I immediately said, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about.
Now, you were asked this morning a question about a deposition you gave in Colorado.
Yeah, the Coomer deposition.
Right, and you were asked, I think, about the work you had done on the first complaint.
Yeah. I think I have it here. Important to look at the exact language because I think it was taken out of context. Yeah, that's a defamation case by an employee of Dominion who quit.
And can you explain?
Dominion and he's suing the president and just about everybody that I know for defamation, including me. And in that case, what I was describing is my trip back from, I said I began writing the complaint on the way back from Philadelphia. I did.
And what complaint were you
A
referring to?
generic complaint. The complaint I was complaining about when I said, do you have a draft, just a draft complaint that we could get started with?
So this was at the very outset.
Yeah, and it was at the very outset that I had a discussion, could be Ken Starr, I don't remember exactly who, about this idea. You know, you really can't get, I think the advice was, don't get too involved in one case in one jurisdiction. This is going to have to be it sounds like there's going to have to be a multi-jurisdiction case. So I started thinking, well, let me draft up a little language so they'll start thinking that way. And that's what I worked on in the car, but I couldn't do too much of it because I get sick if I work in the car.
Okay, now, you already testified about your role in the first amended complaint. But at what point was it decided that a second amended complaint should be drafted? Well, let me put it this way, prior to the November 17th argument before Judge Brand, how much earlier in relation to that was the second amended complaint prepared?
The second amendment was prepared at the last minute when I was surprised by the fact that there was a first amended complaint. I didn't know that. I thought we had one complaint. It was the one that I had signed off on, but that where I said I made 10 to 20% of the contribution. I don't know how much of a contribution I made. It wasn't very much. I shouldn't have said 10 or 20% or 50 or 30. What I did was contribute the idea of let's broaden these allegations so that we can include other jurisdictions, because I'm starting to get very, very, and this is like the second day, the third day, I'm starting to get eerily similar allegations from other districts. It almost seems like what they're telling me in Michigan is the same as what they're telling me in Wisconsin, which is the same as what they're telling me in Arizona. They all had these pens. Republicans claimed they couldn't see any paper.
Okay, so let's stick on to Pennsylvania. So
in fact, I mean, they were counting the number of some of our people were like counting. They're having like a competition who had more complaints that came in, and we weren't soliciting these complaints; they were coming to us.
okay, now who worked on drafting the second amended complaint?
Well, I worked on that.
No, besides you,
My team there, Joe and Vicky DeGeneva wrote probably the
was Joe DeGeneva.
Joe and Vicky, and whoever was the associate working with them, I can't remember.
Was there local counsel working on it?
Yeah, there was local counsel working on it.
Was that?
That was Mr. Yeah, he came in at the last minute.
Who was that? You started to say his name.
Mr. Scoringi.
Scoringi, okay.
And he worked on the he may have even come into the office in Arlington, but he worked with Joe and Vicky in putting that together. And then I couldn't have had more than an hour with it.
And can you describe the atmosphere under which these documents are being drafted?
Well, for them, they were, meaning that team right there, they were singularly focused on Pennsylvania. And then,
Well, what was the atmosphere? If you could paint a picture for.
well, I mean, at the beginning, it was chaotic.
All right.
By the time we get to what was it, the 12th? When did I argue? The 16th or 17th?
The oral argument was.
It's still pretty chaotic by then.
Now,
That was probably our first case.
right now, during this time, while you're preparing the documents, and you're hearing complaints from people down there, you're getting information from various sources, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean,
Who was the people who were supplying this information to you?
my goodness, 50 people. I don't know. I mean,
Well, was there someone?
as Bernie Carrick, really Bernie's responsibility was investigating and trying to make some sense out of everything that we were getting. I mean, look, half to 3/4 of what you get, you just discard. I mean, I knew that from handling similar situations like that. And you try and focus on the ones that have the most possibilities or seem like you can expand them. And I knew Bernie would have an instinct for that, because Bernie had done a lot of, among the other things that he described, litigation investigation. So that I couldn't look at the documents coming in and say, oh, this one has no chance. Oh, this one we should follow up on. But Bernie would have an instinct for that. I asked him to get people like that. He used investigators, and he used some paralegals and lawyers. Don't remember.
Okay.
I know he had a team. I put my son Andrew in charge of the phones, because we had gotten a lot of complaints that people were being treated horribly on the phone.
And do you
And
recall?
he brought me some very significant information, but about another jurisdiction. And Bernie was taken off it for a while to have to go out there and investigate that.
Mr. Cavins, you think this might be an appropriate time to take our mid-afternoon break?
Okay, or what
I
time?
think so.
What time would we resume?
Let's take 15 minutes, and I would very much like to complete the testimony of the witness today, if you
I
can.
would also.
Maybe be, and absent objection from Mr. Fox, I would not be opposed to your leading a little more directly.
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you. We'll take a break until 3:30.
Thank you.
Opening up the breakout rooms now.
Okay, Mr.
All
Cameron.
right. Yes. Thank you. So a few more questions, Mr. Giuliani. So prior to your argument on the 17th, were you receiving information from various sources about the election?
Yes, I'd only have to describe it as a large number of sources.
And was one of the sources a report from a John Droz?
Yes, that was given to me the day before the argument. Yes, I remember that distinctly for a particular reason. Yeah.
And was there any specific page in that report that you or pages that you relied on for purposes of arguing the case or drafting the complaint?
No, well, there were two that I remember,
All right, if we could put the respondents.
and they affected my thinking.
If we could put respondents 11 up on the screen. And this is Mr. Droz's report that was introduced this morning. Is there a specific page that you recall?
Yeah, this would be big.
What page are you referring to?
Well, I have it. It's a page. I'm sorry, the page isn't here, but I remember it. The expert was big.
Well,
big.
there's an exhibit on.
Oh, there it is. Mr. Briggs, right? There you go.
And that's page 25, is it?
That's page 25.
Right. And could you just describe what that?
Yeah, that interested me because, and then I did a drawing, which I have lost. I used to be in my papers. I recreated it for myself. But I did a drawing of it because what that demonstrates is that overnight, the numbers changed from something like Trump ahead by 650 to Trump ahead by 150.
Is that 1,000?
1,000 from, and when I went to bed on the night of the election, I thought he had won Pennsylvania because he was ahead by 650,000 votes or 700,000. I remembered it as 700,000. If you look at that carefully, it's more like 650,000. That's the red line on top. The blue line, and you see at the beginning, is where Biden was when they suspended counting in Philadelphia. And they suspended it. They weren't supposed to suspend it. They decided at the time they were going to suspend it. It happened to be the same time they suspended it roughly in Wisconsin, Detroit, and Atlanta. All four at the same time.
And in addition to that,
So in that period of time, overnight, that is a representation of the raw vote, because I went back and had Boris check it and Colonel Walton. So basically, it was a change of Trump ahead by 650 to Biden ahead by 150. And it seemed to me, as that kind of points out, that was statistically, some people would say impossible, others would say improbable.
and was there
Evidence like that? I had read up enough about election law to know that certain types of evidence is admissible in election cases that would not be admissible in cases I was using. For example, extrapolations are allowed because of the time. Extrapolations are allowed because you don't have all the core data. You don't get the actual voting list until March. So you're never going to know who actually voted with great accuracy. Sometimes the Secretary of State can make an exception, but we didn't take the one in Pennsylvania.
in addition to page 25, was there any other page that you
Well, the next one is a more comprehensive analysis of what happened after they unceremoniously stopped.
is this the page you're referring to?
So what they did in Philadelphia,
Excuse me, is this the page you're referring
that's
to?
the page I'm referring to.
And this is page number
Yeah,
27.
that's the second one. I did not do my own computations there, but I didn't have to.
Mr. Giuliani, is this page 27?
Maybe I'm going too fast.
No, just look up on the screen. On the screen, is that page 27?
Yeah,
Okay, and you relied also on this, on the information in this page?
yeah, now that's an analysis of basically what happened in the days after the election, in the 3 or 4 days of counting, where each day in the 5 or 6 places I was tracking, Biden got closer and closer and closer. And then he just got over the top and won. What that shows is every time there were additions, out of 100% of the additions, only 19% favored Trump. But the total number is totally wacky. The total number is Biden picked up 578,000 votes. Trump picked up 33,290. Now that is, just as a matter of common sense, totally impossible. That means that Trump got, I think I'm right with the computation, 0.04% to Biden's 99.06% or 6%.
Okay,
That you can, I've shown that to 10 different statisticians who say that is totally crazy. And this is an exaggerated version of what happened in all the other jurisdictions. Exaggerated because they had to make up more votes in Pennsylvania than any place else.
all right, now in addition to the Droz information, were you relying on information from Mr. Navarro? Was that coming into you also?
That was more of an exchange. Mr. Navarro, I know personally and can, work with him a number of years. So we exchanged, he was doing his own analysis from the very beginning of the data. So we exchanged quite a bit of information. And his chief assistant and mine, and in this case, it would be Christina who testified. They were almost in daily communication. So I got any number of.
You're referring to Ms. Bob.
With Bob, yeah. And so I knew his report long before it was published. I would see the charts and make recommendations about them or vice versa. I would send over, I may have, for example, what I just showed you there, I may have sent to Peter and asked him to go check the raw voter list, because those numbers you could determine are they accurate or not. And in both cases, you can go back to the actual vote cast during that period of time. Where you're at a disadvantage is you can't get the names of the people who voted on election day in most states until March.
Okay,
So those have to, so you have to extrapolate from what you have to what's out there.
now in
And you're
addition,
allowed to do that.
all right, in addition
At
to
least
Ms.
that's what the cases that I read said.
In addition to Mr. Navarro, earlier today, you saw on the screen 4 documents that were not introduced, that they were identified as exhibits 40, 41, 42, and 43. Do you recall that?
Sure. Oh, you mean the documents through Mr. Carrick?
Yes. The
Yes,
report, yeah.
I do recall.
And did you rely on those documents in your investigation or drafting or argument? In
Just
this case?
To some extent, I'd have to describe the extent. The answer would be yes, I did, and no, I didn't.
Okay, explain it.
Well,
do you want to do that
I would
individually?
have to see
Do you
the
want to-
document to
Right,
explain.
why don't we put up
But
exhibit,
basically, they
let's put up exhibit 40 from Mr. Giuliani. Response. Now, with respect to that document, did you rely on that document to prepare any arguments?
Objection, this is not an evidence.
Overruled.
Well, I saw that document, and it was described to me as well, orally. And the only thing that impressed me, I mean, and I knew, as Mr.
I think, we ought to answer the question that was posed and then.
I'm sorry, I thought we were good. Okay,
Did you rely on that document in preparing?
in part, only in part.
All right, let's put up document.
Well, can I tell you the part? I mean,
Well, if you recall the part, sure.
sure, I relied on it because it's such a large number. I didn't think it was accurate or inaccurate. I knew there was no time but I assumed that over the course of the next couple of weeks, we would figure out how many of those were actually voted or that were 112 years old. I think the gross number there was 1,111. This was only, remember, only the mail-in ballots. That leaves the far larger number of voters on election day still out there. So you could extrapolate maybe double this in an argument. So what I would have wanted to know is how many of those were real. And the number 1,111 seemed like we had a large universe to work with.
So you
That
relied,
would have been it.
right, so you relied in part on the information in this.
It was a large number. It could turn out they were all inaccurate, or they were all accurate, but it looked like it was starting. If that had said 100, I would have thrown it out and said, forget about it, as I did many things.
Can you put up exhibit 41, please? And now with regard to this exhibit, did you rely in part or at all on this, the information?
Pretty much the same thing. This was only one of 4 or 5 different reports I was given either before, and here I'm sorry, Judge, it would be also after the argument about death analysis. And it changed quite a bit. Again, that seemed to be a large number to start with just for absentee ballots. So it seemed to me that that'd be a fruitful area for further investigation, and one on which you could make an argument that there certainly were dead people that voted. Then I had experts, in addition to this, that looked at different reports like this and varied from 2,000 to 10,000. It was, so I never really used an absolute number. I just knew that was an area where we were going to probably get a bunch of dead people who voted, which is not uncommon in Philadelphia.
Could you put up exhibit 42? Now, with respect, Mr. Giuliani, to exhibit 42, did you rely in part on information from this document?
In the same way that I described. Fairly significant number, given the limitations that are explained there, including here, they illustrate the point that I was making about extrapolating from the numbers, but they just extrapolated to the based on the mail-in ballots. So you'd have to more than double that if you were going to extrapolate that to all the ballots. But I knew that one of the areas that would be fruitful for us if we had continued in Pennsylvania would have been dead people voting, which is a perennial problem there.
All right, can you put up exhibit 43? Now, Mr. Giuliani, did you rely at least in part on information in this report?
Less so, except again, the number. That's a lot of similar names. Mr. Fox's point is well taken, that the names are similar, so a lot of them are going to turn out to be probably coincidence. I couldn't believe that all of them were coincidence when you're talking about 214,410, but I didn't have any instinctual feeling for this. It's something I would have followed up on. It's something that told me, all of these things together told me this was a really screwed up election. I'm sorry for the vernacular, but that's the way it said to me that we were pursuing a legitimate case, that we weren't making this up, that there are a lot of problems here. And then, the 240 affidavits, all of which laid out anywhere from 1 to 120,000 irregularities, said the same thing to me.
All right, Mr. Chair, based upon Mr. Giuliani's testimony, we would now move into evidence exhibits 40 through 43.
Mr. Fox?
I don't object as long as they're not admitted for their truth. If they're just admitted for the fact that Mr. Giuliani relied on them, that's fine.
That is the purpose of the application.
These exhibits are admitted solely for the purpose of demonstrating that Mr. Giuliani relied on them and to show his state of mind. They are not being offered for the truth of their contents.
Thank you.
Or they're not being admitted for the truth of their contents.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, Mr. Giuliani, as to the second amended complaint, did you knowingly make any allegation that you knew or believed did not have any basis in law or fact?
No, I would never do that.
Have you ever been disciplined by any grievance committee anywhere?
No, in 50 years of practicing law, I've never been disciplined. I've never been cited. I've never been complained,
Have you ever been?
except for people that I convicted who want to kill me, I guess.
So the answer is no.
No, I've never had a disciplinary proceeding of any kind after 50 years of law practice.
My question, Mr. Giuliani, of course, was prior to this litigation.
Yes, of course, prior to this litigation. Since then, I have.
And have you ever been accused of filing a frivolous lawsuit or
No.
making a frivolous
No,
claim?
no, I haven't.
Now, the chair asked you yesterday to explain the theory under which the two individual plaintiffs sued the 7 counties in which they did not live, rather than the 2 counties in which they did live. Is there anything
Sure.
you'd like to amplify?
I would. When I analyze standing in this case, it seemed to me that standing would not be an issue because the president and his committee were plaintiffs. And once the president lost, he stepped into the place of the committee and was an injured party. So he surely had standing. I didn't think we'd have any problem with his standing. And you can see on page 12, paragraph 20.
Where are you reading from?
I'm talking about the second amended complaint, which is the one that I would be the most familiar with and had input into. We specifically alleged on paragraph 21.
Put up the second amended complaint, which is. There it's in it. Oh, which
Well,
paragraph?
this is what I was referring to earlier. After the primary election, a candidate stepped into the shoes of his party.
Identify the paragraph.
It's paragraph 21, page 12 of the complaint,
Of the document?
23 of the document. After the primary election, a candidate steps into the shoes of his party and their interests are identical. A candidate for office in the election of issues up with a direct and substantial harm sufficient for standing to contest the manner in which an election will be conducted. As a direct and proximate result of the actions of the defendant in each of the Trump campaign has been injured in a way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then the next page 24. It'd be page 24. I'm sorry, page 23, excuse me. Page 23.
What paragraph?
Paragraph 21.
We just did that, right?
Yes, so I would have considered that to be first of all, an assertion of competitive standing, of which to me was not an issue because he was a candidate. And his candidate surely injured when he loses and he alleges irregularities or wrongdoing in the election, of which there are plenty of allegations of that. And second, there is the almost universal, it is a universal rule criticized because it's used so much of the one, if one plaintiff has standing, you don't inquire and you don't, the standing of the others is just assumed. That's been discussed in and affirmed in about 12 Supreme Court decisions.
Yeah.
I can give you a quick cite to that. This would be,
Are you referring to what are you referring to, Mr. Giuliani?
I'm referring to a law review article that summarizes numerous Supreme Court.
Why don't we get the title of the name of the article?
One good plaintiff is not enough. William and Mary Law School, 2017. Page 484. I mean, this is just one of 100 documents you could get The one plaintiff rule is applied with considerable frequency. I should add this law review article criticized it, thinks it should be reversed. Maybe it should be, but as his lawyer, I'm not going to.
Is there something you'd like to? Is there
The
something
one
like-
plaintiff rule is applied with considerable frequency. It has been invoked in more than 24 Supreme Court cases and probably hundreds of cases in the lower federal courts. And it's figured in several of the highest profile cases of the last several years. Then they go on and list the travel ban case, the Obama administration deferred action immigration program, the Affordable Care Act case, the climate change case, the same-sex marriage case, and King versus Burwell, which was the most recent Supreme Court case involving the Affordable Care Act. Again, basically the theory is if one plaintiff has adequate standing, you're not going to inquire into the standing of the others. You're going to litigate it and get it done in federal court. So I did not do a detailed analysis of Robert's standing or the other defendant who I never really even met
In the plaintiff.
the plaintiffs. I did assume that they were injured parties. And probably if we fail there, we fail on the third prong of this standing test, which is there wouldn't be a real practical remedy for them. But I didn't think, I'm sorry, I didn't think that was I certainly didn't allege anything is untrue. I laid it out who they were, what they did. I didn't pretend they had standing. And the one that I did lay out the standing for is perfectly adequate standing. And I had a perfect right to rely on the one plaintiff rule, even though it's criticized by law reviews, and I may even find it kind of strange.
All right.
We also, one other thing, I also felt pretty secure because I thought they would have standing at least against Bakvar, who was the Secretary of State, who really created the confusion in the first place with their inconsistent letters about whether you could cure or not. And we had witnesses that would testify about that, including lawyers, Republican lawyers, who said they had to advise their committees not to cure because it was a violation. It was a violation of the law of the state legislature, which would prevail over a judicial decision based on the independent legislative theory, which at that point, I don't know if it was a good law, but it was certainly an option that might very well be invoked by the Supreme Court, and one that was very much in our mind.
All right.
So that's standing.
All right. Now, one
I
last.
don't think I made any inaccurate argument, statement, or if I missed one prong of the test, I'm sorry, but
All right.
I didn't mean to, and I certainly didn't make any untrue allegations in this document. I did the best I could with the time that I had to be accurate, and I.
One last point, Mr. Giuliani. Professor Ortiz this morning was asked by Mr. Fox if the second amended complaint had any, or I think this was yesterday, if the second amended complaint had any evidence of fraud or alleged fraud. And he said no. To save time, could you give the chair and the panel the paragraphs in which you believe that those allegations were made?
Sure.
Rather than reading them.
Can you put them up on the screen, imagine?
And we can put them on. I think we'll put that up on the screen as an exhibit.
So I'm at. Excuse me.
Yes, you have my. No, here they are. Here.
I just would like to point out one other thing, that Mr. Fox alleged that we were being deceptive or about the Carter Baker report, where at some point the word potential was left out of a quote. I want to point out that page 38 of the exhibit, paragraph 59, we quoted accurately. If we left it out of one of the documents, it was not intended, I want to assure the panel, it was not intended to mislead anybody. We certainly had alleged it right here in a complaint that it was potential voter fraud. There may be a difference between potential voter fraud and voter fraud, but the thrust of it was that of the various ways in which to vote, mail-in voting has always been considered the most prone to fraud or potential fraud. But we certainly quoted it accurately and had no intent to deceive anybody.
All right, with respect to my question on allegations of fraud, would you just cite the paragraphs in the second amendment complaint for the panel?
I'm good with it.
Oh, this is the paragraph.
Here. Okay, let me go through these first.
Page.
Well, here, I mean, here's one,
Page.
a page 66.
1 second. The paragraph number.
The paragraph number is 128. First of all, I would use that as an example. First of all, a specific allegation, as specific as you can make it. Allegheny County poll workers. We had witnesses who would testify to that, and they would say that they were uniformly unable to do what they had done for 20 years, which is to look at the ballots.
Next paragraph.
And okay, number 129. In Center County, a poll worker reported that persons appearing at the polls and admitting that they were New Jersey voters rather than would nonetheless provide provisional ballots on which to vote. That would clearly be fraud. It alleges the place, it alleges the allegation itself, and we would have presented witnesses that, but all we have to do is allege it at this point. We can't. The complaint is not the place to put evidence. You don't put evidence in a complaint. You put allegations in the complaint, which is deemed to be true. And this I had support for. I didn't make this up.
Okay, next paragraph.
Number 97.
Oh, page 9,
Page 97.
paragraph number.
This one here is the paragraph number 224. I would cite this both for fraud and for a specific allegation of fraud, or whatever you want to call it, because we were using fraud not in we weren't trying to convict them of fraud civilly or criminally. We were using fraud as one of the ways in which the president, his committee, and the others would deny due process and equal protection. There is no fraud claim. It's an equal protection and due process case. So this one mentions the person, George Andrew Gallifin. He's been a resident of Pennsylvania for 28 years. On November 20th, he was a credentialed observer of vote counting and verification. On November 4, he arrived at the convention center to observe city employees count absentee and mail-in ballots. He was barred by city officials from entering the area where the vote counting was taking place. Mr. Gallatin waited in the lobby at the convention center from 10 to 4 p.m., but was never allowed to observe the vote counting and verification area. Mr. Gallatin, who also served as an official observer for the 2020 Trump campaign in Buck County, Pennsylvania, from 10 p.m. November 3rd through 7 p.m. on November 4th, he was able to observe without issue the ballot processing in Bucks County, as were Biden campaign watches. I would say that's an allegation of fraud, or from which you can infer fraud, which is the way I always did as a prosecutor. It's when you put together 1,000 times in which people were barred from not seeing paper, you can infer fraud.
Next paragraph.
Similarly, you can infer when someone invokes the Fifth Amendment in a civil proceeding, you can infer that they're guilty in a civil proceeding. That's what an inference is. The pattern of conduct that we allege all throughout here, which I won't bore you with to go through it, but the pattern of conduct here was so extensive that it certainly allowed an inference of fraud. Now, you can rebut it. We're at the first stage of a proceeding, I would point out. We're not even at the hearing.
Next paragraph.
131 in Delaware County, an observer of the county.
What page is that?
I'm sorry. 67. 131. In Delaware County, an observer of the county.
I'm confused. Are we going to put this up? And if not, thank you.
I'm sorry. 131. In Delaware County, an observer at the county office observed issues related to mail-in voted ballots being scanned through machines 4 or 5 times before finally being counted. When a voting machine warehouse supervisor arrives, she just they must be defective. From that and other allegations like that, of which there were 15, 20, you can allege that those were multiply counted, which there was testimony to. This is the allegation that would have been shown at the hearing, which we never had. But that's the function of a complaint. And then finally, you present your evidence at an evidentiary hearing, not in the complaint. This is about as specific as I could be.
The next
Then
paragraph.
in the next one is very similar, 132. 133 is an entirely different area that we haven't talked about. And that's the fraud with the US Postal, the mail carriers and the mail carriers union. 133, mail carriers have noted significant anomalies related to the delivery of mail-in ballots. A mail carrier for the USPS in Erie County has noted that during the course of the general election, mail-in ballot delivery period, there were multiple instances in which dozens of mail-in ballots were addressed to single addresses, each ballot being in a different name. Based on the carrier's experience delivering mail to these addresses, the carrier is aware that the people whose names were on the ballots are not names of people who live at those addresses. In addition, ballots were mailed to vacant homes, vacation homes, empty lots, and to addresses that do not exist. Now, I would submit that that is also specific, as specific as a complaint can be, particularly due process and equal protection, in which fraud is one example. You can certainly infer, if not conclude fraud, if this is true, which it has to be assumed to be true.
Next paragraph.
And I think I did my job correctly there because I had support for that. Now, finally, and I had this report, it's been reported by Project Veritas.
What page?
This is page 57, I'm sorry, 68 that you have. It's 134.
Paragraph 134.
134. It's been reported by Project Veritas, with which I was very familiar. Project Veritas supports everything it does with tape recorders. It has been reported by Project Veritas in a release of November 5, 2020, that carriers were told to collect, separate, and deliver all mail-in ballots directly to the supervisor. In addition, plaintiffs have information that the purpose of that process was the supervisor hand stamped the mail-in ballots. Now, I personally confirmed that with the head of Project Veritas, but I did that after the complaint was, after this was written, because I was going to add him as a witness, but never had the opportunity to do.
Okay, I see there are like only a few more paragraphs, but we can,
Yeah, there are other paragraphs, that I had outlined.
but these are
Other counties, very similar allegations of direct fraud like that, or from which you can infer fraud given the multitude of times that it happened, incomprehensible, that would just happen coincidentally that often. Or at least you would argue that as a litigator. 147, paragraph number 72. This
Hold on, wait,
I'm sorry.
147.
Defendants refuse to allow watchers and representatives to be present when the required declarations on envelopes containing official absentee ballots were reviewed for sufficiently when the ballot envelopes were opened and when such ballots were counted and recorded. Instead, watchers were denied access by security personnel in a metal barricade from the area where the review, opening, and counting were taking place. Some of the Trump campaign workers were threatened with arrest if
we'll read it from the screen.
some of the Trump campaign watchers were threatened with arrest if they approached the counting process area. Consequently, it was physically impossible to view the envelopes or ballots. That laid out the pattern.
And I think you have two more paragraphs.
We have two more. Okay. This is 82,
Page
Page number.
page 82. That will be the first 172. I'm sorry, it would be 173. 172 is the theory of dilution that we cited. Okay, 173. Every voter in a federal election, whether he votes for a candidate with a little chance of winning or for one with little chance of losing, has a right under the Constitution to have his vote counted without it being distorted by fraudulently cast votes. 174, invalid or fraudulent votes debase and dilute the weight of each valid vote cast. And then the final allegation, 175, injured in the free exercise of a right or privilege secured to him by the laws and the Constitution of the United States. That's what we were using fraud for. I would also add for that at the beginning of the complaint, we lay out citations from the international standards for elections that say that it is universally accepted that to be an observer at an election count means to be able to see the documents and examine the specifics. And that this election would have been cited as a failure, given the decision of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, a failure under international standards. That's in the first paragraphs of the complaint, if you want to look at that. And it seemed to me that was a very powerful argument, certainly creating a good faith basis on which to argue that at some point there might be a court that would come to that conclusion, that this was fraud, since it violated international standards that are utilized when we evaluate elections. If they were to do this in Colombia and we were observing the election, we would cite the election for fraud. They had excluded observers who couldn't see the paper and were uniformly refused in a concerted effort in which violence was even threatened and arrest. I can't see how that's a bad faith argument.
All right, thank you, Mr. Giuliani.
I certainly didn't say anything untrue. I don't even think I exaggerated. This is all supported by affidavits. If you want me to, we've got I'll pull out the affidavits that support this.
Thank
But
you,
I think
Mr.
you know that they support it.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Fox.
I would like to focus first on the report from Mr. Droz, which was Respondents Exhibit 11. Before, I don't know, we need to put it up, but you referred to two charts in that.
Yes, sir.
Who was the person that put those charts together?
I can only tell you what it says, Mr. Briggs.
Okay. Before we get to that, as I understood what your testimony was the other day, you received the Droz report, you believe, I think you said in the car on the way to the oral argument before Judge Brand, correct?
No, if I did, I corrected it today. I don't think I said that. I think I said I received it the day before, but I read it in the car.
Oh, I see. I apologize. You read it in the car on the way to the oral argument.
Yes, sir.
And I think your testimony yesterday also was that you had drafted the second amended complaint before the oral argument.
I had put in my contribution to it. I think before the oral argument, I may have done it even in the car. I don't remember exactly when I did that.
Now,
I assume that just given the timing, I assume that I must have, but it's possible I did some work on it after.
Now to go back to the those two charts that you looked at, and we can put them up if you need to, but do you know anything about the credentials of the people that wrote those charts, that drew those charts up?
I do not, except what I just learned.
What you learned today?
Yes.
And did you know anything at all about the data on which they base those charts?
No, I didn't allege anything about these charts. It informed my opinion that this was a screwed up election.
I was actually going there, but let's get there right now. It is fair to say that in the facts that you pled in the complaint, second amendment complaint, and also in your argument before Judge Brand, you never alluded to any of that information, did you?
Not specific. I did allude to. I'm not sure if we alleged if we allege dead people voting in the complaint. I don't think we did, but we may have, but it wasn't based on this.
Okay, now, as I understand what you said about those charts, they showed that at a certain point in the election, Trump seemed to be comfortably ahead, and then all of a sudden Biden caught up with him. Is that right?
Mm-mm. What they purport to show is anomalies. They purport to show things that are statistically viewed by statisticians as impossible or unlikely.
But the unlikely thing, as I heard your testimony, was that Biden could come from so far behind to catch up to Trump, correct?
A short period of time. Yes,
Yeah.
and then you would offer it as testimony and it could be rebutted.
And you are aware that in elections, there's something, I think I don't know what they call it, the blue wave or the blue crest. You familiar with that term?
I'm not, but I'm.
You're not familiar with the term. For example, in most states, cities are more democratic than other areas of the state, correct?
Almost always, yes.
Right. And cities are, because they're more populous, it generally takes longer to count the votes in those jurisdictions, correct?
Not necessarily.
But in will you agree that in Pennsylvania, the vote for Philadelphia and Pittsburgh came in later?
To me, as a prosecutor, late counting is always suspicious, but
And it's also the case, is it not, that traditionally Democrats have been more willing than Republicans to vote by mail or absentee.
well, that's kind of new. I mean, we didn't have much mail voting until 2020. I mean, there were 200,000 out of 5 million in the election before, and then there were 2 million out of 5 million.
Well, would you agree?
May I finish? I would say that's a recent, what you're saying certainly applies to 2020, where we have experience with it, and to 2022. But historically, when we had the traditional absentee ballot, I don't believe that was the case.
But it certainly applied in 2020. We've agreed about that, correct?
It sure seemed that way, yeah. I mean, that's
one of the reasons it applied was because President Trump was actively discouraging people from voting by mail, wasn't he?
I'm not disputing it. I don't remember that.
All right. And you're also aware, are you not, that in Pennsylvania, the law prohibited the counting of the mail-in ballot until Election Day.
That's true almost everywhere.
Right.
At that point, they've changed that subsequently, but in 2020, that was pretty much true everywhere.
And it takes longer to count mail-in ballots than it does that ballots are counted that are cast in person, because you got to open the outer envelope, you've got to inspect the outer envelope, you got to open it, you got to pass it on. Somebody's got to open the secrecy envelope. They got to flatten the ballots into a pile, and then they got to be counted. And it takes longer, doesn't it?
Yeah, but not that long. I mean, every other state did it in a much faster period of time than this state, and they had the benefit of excluding any observers. They should have been able to do it a lot faster since nobody was looking at it.
Now, let's go to, can we put up exhibits 40 through 43? Let's put up exhibit 40 first. I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. Now, before we get into the exhibit 40, let me just say, make the point that you didn't rely on none of this specific information that's contained in either of these 4 exhibits was pled in your complaint or argued before Judge Brand, correct?
No, sir. No. As I said, it just informed my attitude that I was arguing in good faith that there was a lot of possibilities to being able to prove that this election was fraudulent. And I'll remind you that last night, Georgia counted all of its absentee ballots in one night.
And this exhibit and the other 3 exhibits that Mr. Carrick testified about were not included in the materials that you produced to us when we asked for all the evidence that you had relied on. Is that not true?
Yes, I didn't know that, but yes, yes, the answer is yes.
And they weren't even included originally in the exhibits that your lawyers presented. They surfaced sometime after that. Isn't that true?
Yes, they showed it to me sometime after, and I said, yeah, I did see them, and I explained it to them. I think pretty much what I explained it to you.
And I don't see any dates on them. Any dates on them? Indicate when they're prepared?
I don't see any on that. There,
Let's just look at this first one. Unique voters over 112 years, or unique voters over 112 years old. Just take the first one. Mr. Lorenz. He purports, it purports that he was born in 1854. You see that?
I see Mr. Lamonaco as the first one.
Monaco, I apologize. I can hardly read this, so my fault. Monaco, he reports that he was born in 1854, correct?
That's what it says, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. The computers weren't all that accurate in 1854.
But that doesn't mean it wasn't. I mean, look, I know I get ridiculed for this, but this has to be absolutely true. Joe Frazier voted 3 times in Philadelphia after he died.
Well, we come back. Let's just stick with Mr. Lamonaco.
I have those records if you'd like to see them.
How do you suppose? And if Mr. Lamonaco had waited until he was 100 years old to register to vote, which would have been 1954, it still wouldn't have been recorded in a computer database, would it?
Given the condition of their voter records, it would not be impossible. I have articles here about something like 20% of the entries in the voter rolls in the United States are totally inaccurate.
Do you remember seeing a declaration that you had gathered, and I don't have it in front of me, I'll have to pull it out later, that talked about how there were many typographical errors in this database with respect to these birth dates?
Well, that many entries, there must be some typographical errors. The only point I was making is, with this many, it was a fruitful ground for us to further investigate. I saw 4 or 5 other documents similar to this about dead people voting. So all this did was reinforce my sense that this was a legitimate case that I was arguing as an advocate in the light most favorable to my client. That's all.
Okay.
I'm not saying it may be all untrue. It probably isn't, and it probably isn't all true.
All right.
We would have to find out.
Do you have any idea how any of these people voted, where they voted for Trump or Biden?
You never know that.
Well, the older voters tended to favor Trump, right?
But
Sorry.
if they voted in Philadelphia,
I'll withdraw that question.
like 86,
He withdrew it.
okay.
Now, let's look at the next one. Well, no, let's not look at the next one. We've already agreed you didn't use these in your pleadings or your arguments. Your case, however, Mr. Giuliani, was based on not on dead people voting. It was based on the notice and cure and the somebody had a nice term for it that everybody agreed to, and it's now gone on in my head. The geographical restrictions on the observers, correct? That's what your case was based on.
That seems very euphemistic, but it was based on the fact that there was many examples of fraud in the election, of which those would be 2.
Right.
And of course, this is the complaint. If it went forward, you would add to that other things that you discovered. And one of the things I certainly anticipated was adding dead people voting, particularly because of the reputation of Philadelphia. As I told you, I could have been wrong about that, but I certainly anticipated it. And I'm just offering that to show you that I did that in good faith, not in the way that you've alleged.
Mr. Giuliani, did you plead that?
No, I didn't, because I wasn't at the stage yet where I was ready to plead, which I think shows that I was being responsible.
You have said several times in the course of your testimony that what a lawyer does is plead allegations, not evidence. Am I quoting you right on that?
Correct.
That's not what a lawyer does, is it, Mr. Giuliani, under Rule 8?
Allegations with reasonable support.
What Rule 8 says is you're supposed to.
If I may, I think you abbreviated what I said. I think I've said, and if I did, it was only because I abbreviated the remark. A lawyer pleads allegations for which he has a basis, which is what I think I gave you with all of those affidavits and what I'm trying to give you with these documents. I'm trying to show you that I had, even if you disagree with it, a reasonable basis for the allegations, enough so that an advocate who has to view it in the light most favorable to his client would allege it. Even with that, there are certain things I didn't allege because I didn't think we met that standard. This is one of them.
Mr. Giuliani, does not the federal rules require you to plead facts?
Yes, yeah, but not evidence, facts.
All right, now, you just went through, I think I counted 1, 2, 3.
The only thing I would amend that to, if you define facts as true, then of course you can't know that when you allege it in a complaint. You're alleging what you know at the time. You assume it's true, and then you try to prove it. That it's not.
I'm sorry, are you finished?
Yeah, certain people define facts as truth. Certain people find facts as an item of information. If you mean item of information with support, that's what you plead.
I think I counted 7 paragraphs in the second amended complaint about which you testified, in which you identified facts that you pled, which you believe supported the allegations that you brought. Am I correct about that?
Well, I think I offered them to say they're facts that I pled, for which I took from some document or what some person that I had support for.
And would you agree that a number of the facts that you pled had nothing to do with notice and cure or the geographic location? For example, the first 2 paragraphs that you talked about were that you talked about in your direct testimony were allegations that in certain jurisdictions there was a problem with provisional votes. Now, provisional votes are situations where people have already have been given the opportunity to vote, correct?
Provisional voting in this particular case, and in the allegations we made about it, are people who allege that they didn't vote, that a vote was entered for them, which would be fraudulent. And when they showed up at the polling place, and the number in Pittsburgh was 17,000, and when they showed up at the polling place, they were confronted with the fact that they had already voted. They say they didn't. Many of the declarations say that. There are considerably more people that said that aren't even in the declarations. But that was a common complaint in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. People showed up, they wanted to vote, and they were told, oh, you already voted by absentee ballot. These people said, no, we didn't. We either never got one, or we never returned one, or look, I have one here, it's not filled out. And then they were required to vote by a provisional ballot. Now, some of them, let me finish. The allegations differ. I had quantified them earlier. Some of them, they were not allowed to vote. Most of them, they were allowed to vote. But many of them went and checked, and their vote was never registered.
But that was not what you were pleading in the provisions that you just cited to the hearing committee, was it?
I don't know what you're talking about. I was pleading that was fraud. And that it was one of the violations of due process and equal protection.
Could we, if Mr. Fox is referring to a specific paragraph, could we have him?
Yes. Could we put up, please, Disciplinary Counsel's Exhibit 9, page 66. And I believe the 2 paragraphs that Mr. Giuliani referred to are 128 and 129.
128.
No, 128.
Oh,
Look, it's up there. It's up on the screen.
It's easier for me to read.
Yeah, there is. It's right. I'll look on the screen. Yeah.
Now, this doesn't have anything to do, neither of these paragraphs have anything to do with persons who claim they had to vote provisionally because the record showed they'd already cast an absentee ballot, right?
Well, most of the complaint doesn't have to do with that, just a certain portion of it. I mean, I don't think I have to allege everything that I alleged earlier in every single paragraph.
No, that's not the point, Mr.
Of course
Giuliani.
I allege that. This was a different part of the complaint.
Mr. Giuliani, when I asked you about provisional voting, you went off into your explanation about these people who said they had to vote provisionally because the record showed they'd voted by absentee. Neither of these paragraphs that you testified about concern that, do they?
No, they don't.
Similarly, you discussed a situation where one individual was barred as an observer in Philadelphia, correct?
I allege many individuals were born.
But that's on your direct examination. Did you discuss that? One of the allegations you talked about was a single individual who they wouldn't let in as an observer, right?
No, I didn't. I didn't talk about one individual that was not let in as an observer. I talked about many.
Page 97, please. Paragraph 224.
Maybe I don't understand the question, Mr. Fox.
He's gonna put it up on the screen.
It's on the screen.
224.
This is what you testified about on direct examination, wasn't it, Mr. Gallatin?
Sure, but I also,
Well, I'm talking about your direct examination, sir.
I thought you were saying to me, I only talked about one person in Pennsylvania.
Giuliani, why don't you listen to my question? I'm asking you what you talked about on direct examination.
I am trying to listen.
Paragraphs.
There's no reason to get
All right.
whatever.
This is one of the paragraphs that you cited, correct?
Yes, I read that. Yeah.
And that talks about one person who says he was denied, he was credentialed and was not allowed to be an observer in Philadelphia, correct?
Yes, but he was allowed in the Republican county. It was there to illustrate several points, including equal protection.
And according to you, that's evidence of fraud.
Well, it's a fact alleged, which in combination with other facts could allow you to argue for it. Yes. I mean, if this happened one time, it would no. But if it happened 50 times, now you have an argument. And we have considerably more people that weren't allowed to do it that are allowed. For example, Jeremy Mercer is another one that I discussed during my direct examination who wasn't allowed to do it, and then gave us a list of a number of other people that weren't allowed to do it.
Jeremy Mercer is the one who the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said was given an adequate opportunity to observe, correct?
Yeah, his affidavit contradicts that. That is their conclusion, that being in the room is an adequate opportunity to observe. Jeremy Mercer, if you look at his affidavit, both of them says, I never saw anything. So that's a dispute as to whether he did observe. It's a question of, is it enough that you sit in a room like a potted plant and see nothing relevant? Or do you have to see the identifying data on the document? Mr. Mercer quite adamantly says, after 4 days of begging and pleading and going to court, he was never allowed to see anything. Those are the facts, Mr. Fox. I'm sorry.
Page 67, paragraph 131.
Okay.
Now, this is the example you talked about where there was apparently a malfunction in a machine in Delaware County, and some votes had to be run through the machine 4 or 5 times.
Correct.
And is your testimony that that's evidence of fraud, this malfunction of this one
Certainly
machine?
not by itself. In combination with a number of other witnesses that observed the same thing and who would say that, that during those episodes, there were conversations about finding registrations to attach the vote to. So this was sort of as a basis for being able to put 4 or 5 witnesses in if we had an evidentiary hearing.
Well, all those facts that you just added aren't in your complaint, are they?
The complaint would have been 1,000 pages if I put all my facts in. That's what you have the evidentiary hearing for.
But presumably we'll find in those 300 declarations or 249, however there are, all these other people who had the similar problems with the malfunctioning counting machines, correct?
Yeah, you'll find some people in there like that. I can give you the numbers if you want.
Paragraph 132.3 on the same page. 133. This is a specific example of a mail carrier in Erie County who made some allegations that were in the newspaper. Do you remember that?
No, I'm sorry, I don't remember. I now that I read it, I kind of remember it. Yeah.
Do you also remember that he withdrew the allegations before your complaint was filed?
I do not.
Okay.